You're nobody till somebody loves you. You're nobody till somebody cares. Welcome back to the Kings of Chaos podcast. This is episode 2, and we are entitling this one Forget Your Ex. Originally it was called Fuck Your
The X,
Ex,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
didn't think that would work.
No.
It doesn't make that much sense. But Forget Your Ex. So what are we really talking about today? We are talking about...
Before we get into that, I just want to acknowledge a great fashion choice
Thank
today.
you. Thank you.
This was not planned.
It's the short hair. I feel naked.
Oh my gosh, this was not planned, but that's hilarious. I feel like either the Blues Brothers or
Yeah, it's kind of what we were
yeah,
thinking when we
right?
started, right? It's
Yeah,
like
so
we're on a mission for something.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we
right
don't
now,
have,
I think it's the mission to cause chaos.
yeah, it's not sunglasses though.
No,
Yeah,
definitely not.
we're too old for that.
Yeah.
So Forget Your Ex. We are discussing how there are a lot of sites out there that are trying to help people get their exes back.
Yeah.
And the question is, are they really helpful?
Well, even starting with that, it's you take a look at these sites and sign up, right? It's a paid program. We can coach you to get your ex back and this and that, and it's when someone is down and out, when someone's hurting, talk about a vulnerable population.
Yeah.
Right? You talk about vulnerable people. We've been there. You were there. I've been there. And yeah, at that point, it's okay. How do I get my ex back? What can I do to fix things? It's that whole mentality. But these sites, it's like,
Are they preying on certain people?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but who are they preying on specifically?
I'm gonna art. Well, we talking about attachment theory right now?
I
You
think
want to get into
we're
that?
talking about attachment
get
theory
into
right
that?
now because I think it makes total sense to discuss it.
Okay, so before we get into who they're targeting, and I would say most likely you're probably looking at the anxious type, but you want to get into attachment theory a little
So
bit?
the anxious, preoccupied type.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about this for a minute here.
Okay.
I think it'll help some people
Yeah.
that haven't really delved into that too much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you want me to
Yeah,
go?
go for
All
it.
right.
Talk a little bit. I'll jump in.
So,
Talk about
so interestingly enough, Al and I have both, seen a lot of videos from a local, they're a local group. What's a personal development school.
yeah, you talking about
Her name is Thais Gibson. Yeah. And I stumbled on her a few years ago, but I think we both watched a lot of her videos.
Yeah, someone a couple of years ago said just, hey, check her out. We were talking about attachment theory,
Yeah.
and a female
And,
had
and it's funny
suggested-
that we're from Toronto, and I just you
Exactly.
go through and like, oh, she's local, she's in Toronto.
By the way, do you know your attachment stuff?
Oh, I know my attachment
Yeah.
stuff.
Should I put you on the spot here?
Yeah, but it's not. It's been debunked a little bit. So
Okay.
my attachment style would, from my upbringing and certain things, if you look back to my grandmother was kind of anxious.
Okay.
So even if, you had a sniffle, she'd basically tell my mom, oh, no, I'll take him to the hospital. Like, I'm happy to do that. So when you have that as an upbringing, it gets into your nervous system too. So I would be anxious, preoccupied.
Okay.
But the thing is, it's not fluid, and that's the important thing to remember here. These can change, okay? Even though you can be one type with another person, you can have a different relationship with someone else, and that relationship alone might change it. So there's 4 types, okay? There's secure attachers,
Yep.
who I think make up 50% of the population.
Which
We debated this, but
I still find that one hard to believe.
most sites that
Like,
I've seen, they'll
yeah.
still quote it as 50% of the population. And secure attachers mean that you had really great parents that were loving, that allowed you, a little bit of autonomy so you could learn on your own. You got to witness loving parents, and it wasn't fighting all the time. These are examples, but it's not clinical.
Okay.
But, just the secure people are usually the type of people that, deal with a breakup quite well.
Yep.
Right? They look at it logically, like, this person wasn't right for me. It's like, okay, I'm on to the next one. Okay. Then there's the anxious, preoccupied. So I'm in that group, as I
Yep.
said. We'll get into what you are in a minute. Right after this one. So the anxious, preoccupied are 20% from what I read. And then there are 2 avoidant styles.
Yep.
One of them is called fearful avoidant, which kind of leans a little bit more to the anxious side. I think that was quoted as 5%, but I think these last 2 numbers are actually reversed if I really think back.
Right.
And then there's what's called dismissive or disorganized avoidant. And they also made up
20, it'd be
something
25%,
like
something
that,
like that.
25%, which I thought was a little bit high.
Yeah. Although
Yeah.
I'm starting to wonder, I think it might be the other way. With the stats,
I think it was the other
I
way
think the
too.
fearful avoidance
Yeah.
25%, and think, I think it's again, you get the disorganized,
Hmm.
anxious, right? Anxious
Yeah.
is about the 5%, but I know for me,
Yeah.
I'm probably more on the avoidance side. There are times where I can be a bit anxious avoidant, but
Yeah.
I tend to be more on the avoidance side,
Yeah.
which has been a really interesting journey in trying to understand that as
Why am
well.
I this way in this
And
relationship, and
exactly.
why am I that way in another
And what's
relationship?
really interesting is, and I know we're talking about axes, and we'll get that
Yeah.
soon, but when you take a look, um, anxious types
Mhm.
and avoidant types often tend to come together and find each other. And
And
they,
hold
they
on, what
both
does that create in the relationship then?
chaos,
Roller coaster.
chaos,
Yeah,
chaos.
it's total chaos.
Absolutely. But what's really interesting is what's underlying for both of them is fear.
Hmm.
So with someone who is anxious avoidant,
Hmm.
they fear being alone. They fear not being in a committed relationship. They fear that person leaving them. The whole relationship is based on fear and worry.
They
Whereas,
project their fear of avoidance, fear of
absolutely,
abandonment onto the other person. Yeah,
absolutely,
they become needy.
yeah.
Yeah,
My type,
yeah, the opposite.
I fear or in the past have feared commitment.
Yeah,
So what happens is
closeness.
yeah,
Yeah,
right, and it can be with the most
like
incredible
it's
person.
stifling to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not in every case.
Okay.
Okay, so there, we've talked about
Hmm.
one situation. I'm not going to get into specifics right now, but we talked about one situation where that did change
Yeah.
for me. But typically, that was the case where there was a lot of fear. And I'll be quite honest,
Hmm.
that it'll be interesting to see, as you work through how did that develop.
Yeah.
I think more of that came to me a little bit later in life because I started noticing friends who were getting married.
Hmm.
A lot of my friends were getting married at the time, and it felt like their
Don't do
life.
that. The power of Christ compels you.
It felt like their life was kind of shrinking in. So it was like no more going out, right? No more hanging out with the boys, no more date nights with even the
Yeah,
wife. It would be the type of thing, okay, what's going on? Oh, I watch whatever the wife wants because, the old saying, happy wife, happy life type
that
of thing,
happens when you're the divorce guy too, right? Because they're married and you're not. So yeah, you're
right?
not invited to those things
And,
anymore either. Yeah,
and so I started seeing this with all kinds of friends, and I was like, holy shit, is this what it should be? I mean, my parents, they just recently celebrated their 55th, so
crazy. My grandparents
happy
made it to 50 as
50.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, so happy 55, mom and dad. Great, like monumental in this day and age. Like I say, this day and age, a lot of people are lucky to make it 55 months,
I know.
right?
Yeah.
But as I say, I saw a lot of this when I was around 30 with friends of
Yeah.
mine. And that's when I think the fear really started to kick
Mhm.
in. And it was like, if this is what marriage is, where it's not even a ball and chain,
Mhm.
you're in fucking solitary confinement with the key kind of chucked away
Yeah.
with everything. I was like, this is not the life I want.
No, you
Because
feel like you're in quicksand and you can't escape it, and you'll do anything to get away from it
absolutely.
when you feel anxious.
Because I
Yeah.
want that passion. I want that excitement to be there all the time.
Mhm.
And I saw again, this is just my perspective, but what
But you want your
like
autonomy too.
I did
Yeah.
definitely. And like I say, through work I've done, even through again, one relationship I was in the relationship, it ended,
Yep.
tried it again. It ended.
Hmm.
But that was one relationship where
Why did it end? Why did it come back together?
um
We can get into that after. That's
yeah,
part of
yeah,
what the
yeah,
show's
yeah,
about. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
We don't have to
But
use you as the
there
example,
you go.
but
There you go.
there's
Like,
a roller coaster
there
aspect to
absolutely is.
that.
There absolutely
Yeah.
is a roller coaster. But that was the one
Yeah.
relationship where, although I still exhibited some of my avoidant traits,
Hmm.
it was also the relationship where I was like, no, I can see it. I can see a life here. I maybe didn't articulate it, but I could see it, and I tried to show it in other ways. And that was a real break in pattern for me
Yeah.
from something that I'd exhibited for a long time.
That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like it's a learning experience.
It's growth. It's
Yeah.
growth.
I guess we should get into, a little more fine tuning of what these styles are.
Yeah.
So if I look down at the notes that we took, anxious, preoccupied, again, 20% of the population, they fear abandonment. They tend to be codependent.
Yep.
They are people pleasing and approval seeking. Fearful avoidance. Still don't think it's 5%, but someone can write in and tell us if that's true or not. They flip flop around in commitment. They struggle with trust. They overgive in relationships, but they also run, which is not in the notes here, but they also run when they feel engulfed by the other person,
Yeah.
which makes the other person try to engulf them more
More.
and push them away further. It becomes a push-pull relationship. Um, anyone who watches tarot card readings or anything like that will know that as what the twin flame relationship, where you're runner chaser, runner chaser, runner chaser for a long time.
The best part
Yes,
about twin flames, by the way, which everyone seems to think means, oh, it's
which
your
I don't
soul.
believe in,
No,
but yeah,
which means it's your soulmate and this and that.
there's no soulmate.
Here's the other thing,
It's your trauma.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But here's the other thing about twin flames. If you believe in the soulmate theory, your soulmate is that partner who you're meant to be with.
Mm-hmm.
A twin flame is another person who is essentially in sync with you.
Yeah.
It can be a partner, it can be a friend, it can be a family member.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of crossover and people don't recognize that.
What's the karmic person then? There's that one too. I never
Wow.
figured out. I think
Yeah.
that's the person who's just supposed to come in and teach you a lesson.
Yeah, yeah.
A bad lesson so that you learn the lesson and don't keep repeating it.
Kind of a kick in the nuts.
We'll talk about people's patterns in a minute.
Okay.
So that's fearful avoidant. The next one was dismissive avoidant or
Yeah.
disorganized, which they said is 25% of the population. They feel trapped in relationships. They are emotionally closed off and they are hyper independent, which I've also seen in the fearful avoidant to a certain degree. But because they're anxious, they might more readily come back. Whereas I think the dismissive may not. But again, if someone feels that they have this and can tell us a different perspective, we'd love to hear it.
Absolutely.
The securely attached. I know you can test again that it's 50%. However, they are comfortable in relationships, right? They're, probably good communicators because they learned properly how to communicate, which also isn't on the page, but I just remember that. They have a strong sense of self-worth and they are interdependent. They're not codependent on the other person, which I think is a big one. I believe these percentages also, because I mixed two things together, it came from a Washington Post article, and her name was Jenna Birch. If anyone wants to look up the article, it's called How Knowing Your Attachment Style Can Make You a Smarter Dater. We are not talking about dating. We are talking about breaking up and trying to reconcile with someone, which I'm going to say might not be the best idea, but let's discuss this.
Okay. Yeah, and my thought. I don't necessarily disagree with people getting back together, but under certain conditions. But let's start off where we wanted to begin, which is these sites.
Yeah.
And these individuals who are going to teach you and train you and give you all the secrets to getting that ex back.
Well, what are the kind of things that they're trying to teach you or train you?
Oh, it starts off with the no contact rule.
Yeah.
Right? Anywhere 30 days to maybe about 5-6 weeks. Can't go too long.
Yeah. I've seen up to 90 days on some of these sites. Yeah.
But nothing more than that because, right, the whole idea is, well, then they'll forget about you. So you got to kind of be present. But you also have to kind of show where I don't need you.
Well, even no contact rule, there's certain rules, right?
Absolutely.
It's like you're not contacting them, but what happens if they contact you? Are you supposed to just ignore them? Because then you're breaking the rule of the no contact rule, which is if they contact you and you don't contact them, well, they're going to give up. And what happens if they give up? Well, they're going to find somebody else. So you just instilled fear into somebody. So I take a little bit of issue with that, but I think the no contact rule is an interesting thing. And what's the no contact rule really for? And a lot of them are clear on this, but they'll still give people leeway around it. But what's the point of the no contact rule?
The whole idea is to show that you're moving on, that you're independent, that you don't need this individual. It's also try and make them jealous and want you more. Whereas if you're reaching out,
yeah,
right, you might push them away. It might show you're the one who's really interested. You're the one who's making the effort. So it's almost a reverse psychology type of game with all that.
But again, who are they teaching this to? They're teaching this to anxious, preoccupied people.
Absolutely.
So is that hard for them to do you think?
If you're looking at an anxious person, it's very, very difficult.
I know it's hard for you to see it this way because it's the opposite for you,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult. Yeah. And so it's trying to understand that other side. And there's many times where it might be, okay, that's fine. Not because I'm playing a game. Again, but there's also times where I will want to reach out. But the interesting thing too with the no contact rule is so someone reaches out to you,
Mhm.
rather than be really excited and overly joyed to hear from them, even then, you still got to kind of play it cool, right? You got to play it slow to show that you're not too excited to hear
Yeah.
from them. Almost come off a little bit cold and let that person really make that
Well,
effort.
it's funny to hear it from the other side because I know for the anxious person, right? They're doing it in their mind. They're like, I'm going to do this. The other person's going to run back to me. Here's my real issue with what this is, anyways, with the no contact rule. We'll get into more of what it is in a second. But my real issue with it is this, okay? As an example, you have an anxious, preoccupied person with a fearful, avoidant person. They're both anxious, okay?
Yep.
What typically happens in this relationship is the anxious person engulfs the avoidant person, the fearful avoidant person, as they start to pull away a little bit, right? They want their own autonomy back. They get a little squirrely inside a relationship. You know, the other person wants them to stay at their place more. They're texting them more, and it's too much for them,
Yep.
right? They actually get the, almost like an introvert can get their energy. Even if they're in a work situation, they have to put on a fake personality. So when they come home at night, they want to, decompress from that.
Big time.
And they can't when they live with an anxious person because the anxious person will, and it's common anxious person, like, everything okay? Right. And I've seen myself do this when I was younger because it's like it's the same thing you did to a parent because
Yeah.
you didn't feel comfortable in that situation with that parent. So you can see how that can happen. But then what happens is the fearful avoidant person, and you'd know this, they pull away. And sometimes they'll pull away to such a point where they may just disappear, right? I was in a relationship like this, and someone just all of a sudden one day, it's like they went to their parents' cottage, said, I'm not coming back. And oh. And what's that do to the anxious person? The anxious person wants to immediately pull them back. So instead of not texting and just letting it go and giving that person space to kind of do their own thing, they do the opposite,
Absolutely.
right? So that's what they're trying to teach people here is how not to do that, but it's not in them to do it.
No.
But the truth of the matter is what's funny, because this is a roller coaster relationship. If the anxious person was really just calm and used this rule properly, which they never do, um, sooner or later, and it might take 6 months, what they usually say is with the fearful avoidant person is they will start to miss the other person because now they're not talking to them.
Yeah.
So given enough space, they will miss them. So this is what usually happens. I think you were saying this, how the relationship came back, because then the avoidant person feels comfortable enough to come back into the relationship, and it might work for a while, but then what happens again?
Go
Right?
back to
Then
the
they start to
old
feel
patterns.
engulfed in that. And if they're not working on the relationship together, this is a roller coaster again, and it's push pull.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, but how can you really train someone who's lived that way their whole life, isn't in therapy at this point, isn't looking at themselves for how to really change themselves, and they're going by this playbook that they're being told, you have to do this and you have to do that. Do you think it works?
No.
Okay.
No.
Why?
Why? Because again, it's formulaic. It's
Mhm.
appealing to a certain type, but the reality is, and again, we'll probably get into this a little bit later on.
Yeah.
I do believe that two people can get back together,
Mhm.
but that requires self-awareness on both people's part. It requires work from
Mhm.
both parties. It requires genuine time away to work on
Requires
yourself,
definitely time away, but
right?
and it's not going to be cleared up in 6 months.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But you see, when you start looking at the rules, right?
Mhm.
The rules of getting your ex back.
Yeah.
You look at another rule, okay? Present the image that life is great without them,
Yeah.
right? So on social media, because let's be honest, 99% of social media, it's all about presenting the very best side of you because
Yeah.
people aren't going to be vulnerable and raw on there. So it's presenting,
Show them now you're the life of the party you never were before.
right?
Yeah.
And how much on social media is bullshit and what people, right? It's all Hollywood that they want to do.
Yeah.
But so show your part out partying, show you're out do this, show you're with
So that
this
you're at
new
the gym
partner,
all the
you're
time
right,
now
yeah,
when you've never
yeah.
gone before.
Or you're with this
Yeah.
new partner, or you're with different, photos of different, people all the time,
Yeah.
because that's going to bring them back because you're going to make that ex jealous. So, and that's another rule.
Yeah.
And that's a serious, serious issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because
Because you're teaching someone that, and they say don't do it within you. That's why you want the 90 days because it's going to take you that long to actually make that credible. But is it really credible?
not at
And
all.
are you getting the person back on false pretenses? So I want to just look at, like, we wrote down a list, right,
Yeah.
of what these sites do.
Yeah.
So it's for subscribers who are obviously looking for a quick fix. They use the sites to calm their nervous systems. That's a big thing that I find these sites create is it creates a fantasy, which feeds into the codependent. Codependents oftentimes soothe themselves. It's the only way they can soothe themselves by going into a fantasy that they really think they can get their ex back. And we'll go into the statistics of what that really is later.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now, I'm going to question you on this
yeah,
though. Are you suggesting then that people shouldn't have hope?
hope is one thing,
Okay.
but a false reality and creating a false fantasy of like not recognizing who the other person really is, not recognizing who you are, not really actually fixing anything, but trying to use some basic rules to lure someone back in,
Yeah.
almost on false pretenses that you've changed. I don't think that's a long-term solution.
I agree. But,
Yeah.
I want people to recognize that we're not trying to take away the sense of hope. I think
Yeah.
hope is important
I
for
think the sites
everybody
are good for that. And I think it actually regulates the anxious, preoccupied nervous system.
for a period of time.
But anything that can, an anxious person like that, anything that can really, help them in that moment is not a bad thing. So
Yeah.
in that sense, I'm actually for the sites that way. Because a lot of people like, this coach's voice is really soothing. I wouldn't have gotten through this without listening to this for 6 months. It's false hope in its own way again, but the videos do help them in a certain way. I just don't think they should actually use a lot of what they're teaching to get the other person back because I don't think it works in the long run.
Right.
But what are they teaching in? They're teaching quick strategies that people can't sustain over the long run, as I was just saying.
Yep.
They definitely misuse the no contact rule. And people think, oh, I'm going to do it for 2 weeks. I'm going to get them back. Yeah, they're going to start feeling a little bit, some sooner than others, that they kind of want to test the waters and come back again. But, I think the fearful avoidant also can read when it's fake. And I think that can go against what the person's trying to do because you might get one or two chances at that. And, it's like, the second they sniff it in the water, they're gone.
Yeah.
Again, it distracts you from making real changes to better yourself. And because you're not focused on yourself, you are hyper focused on the other person.
Yeah. And that's a huge one for me.
Yeah.
That one is massive. And again, that's again a whole other topic and conversation.
Yeah.
But how, when you think about a healthy relationship, where does that start? Loving yourself.
I totally agree with that. But how long does that take? You're not going to do it in a month.
I can't give you a timeline, right? The reality is to do any real work, not gonna be done in a month. It's not gonna be done in 6 months. It might take, I know you might disagree with this. My thinking is it might take a year, it might take a year and a half. I'm talking about regular work. There's a lot of growth in there.
Yeah.
6 months, depending on where the person's at.
I will do this if you go at it in a healthy way. And I will cite the personal development school. So thank you, Thais. They do some great work there. And I did take one of their courses.
Okay.
And it was, I just picked one randomly. And this was on abandonment anxiety.
Yeah.
And what it said is you have to take the course, which is a couple videos. And no, we are not, being endorsed by this at all. I'm using it as a great example of something that you could do that's different than going to these particular sites, or you could do both. But it said that if you follow this every day for 21 days, what you would start to do is change your habits. I did it for 30 days just to see, right? And it was a good exercise every night. It's like by yourself, you got the free time. And if you do that, what happens over time is you actually do start to see some of your thought patterns change and some of your actual habits change. And it's more how you approach things. And it did change some of my thinking. Now, I've had, therapists say that you probably need more like 90 days to do it.
I was just going to
Yeah.
say, because I can tell you when I work with people, the 21-day rule,
Yeah. It starts to help.
it starts to help,
Yeah.
but you have to maintain it. For it to become, I'm going to say fixed, kind of part of your lifestyle, part
Yeah.
of your routine, you need that 3-month window. The other thing is, we're talking about you,
Yeah.
right? No, but again, you embrace this, right? And you're open to this. And that's part of the reason we're doing this podcast. And so for you, the 21 days might be a starting point, or for you, the 6 months worth of work may have helped.
Yeah.
But in talking to therapists, right, they will typically say, you're talking about, especially depending on the other work that needs to be done,
Yeah.
possibly years to
So,
really change.
so even with talk therapy, I still think that needs to be supplemented in its own way. And I think anyone who goes on the journey of trying to forget trying to get your ex back, just trying to fix yourself and find the
That's what I'm
self-love
talking about.
and find your
That's what I'm
self-esteem and
talking
all
about.
that. Talk therapy is great, but a
Yep.
lot of people even say, look, I've been in talk therapy for 5 years. It hasn't changed much. One, that can be your approach to it. Sometimes you really need to be ready to be there and do the research when you're walking
And
in
find a good match too.
and find a good
That's
match too.
huge,
But
right?
I
Because
think
without that, you can be there for the rest of your life.
no, my therapist laughs when I walk in. She's like, "What do you want to talk about today?" And I already have like five things, and they're funny stories, but they're real things that I know, and I have the terminology when I walk in. Some people just like talk about random things. I don't know if that helps them so much.
Right.
I think if you're doing the research, it kind of helps you when you're going into it. But I think talk therapy alone helps some people, but it doesn't work for everyone. So I always found like supplementing things. So it's like and when I found online meetup groups, right?
Yep.
And support groups for certain things, it's
Yep.
like, but whatever it is, it could just be people talking in a group where you go have beers with them. But they're people who are like-minded to you or been through similar things. No matter what the group is, it could be something online too. Just don't make the mistake of doing the one thing that I did is I went onto a group in Chicago.
Something with the cult.
I am talking about the cult
And that,
where I just did that kind of on a lark because I was in another group and afterwards I went into this group. But at first they started to read from the book of Scientology and I thought that was a little bit strange. And then they wanted to give us counseling sessions for 15 minutes and all they needed was our phone number. And every other person there was an introvert except for me. I was the extroverted introvert. I was the only person not to give my phone number. So I hope you don't come after me, but I'm going to say that I don't want to be part of it. Is there anything else I need to be covering?
no,
And
I think we got to move on to the next point after that
yeah,
one. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, okay, why do you think people shouldn't want their ex back in the first place? Right? Because this is what they're selling is like to get your ex
Yeah.
back, which I think, look, it's a great fantasy. What's one of the problems when your relationship breaks up, right? You had this great relationship that you thought you had a great
I was gonna say
relationship,
that's the key part. You think you had a great
which I
relationship.
think we can both agree you would say you possibly attracted your trauma, especially in the anxious avoidant dynamic. Would you agree with that?
I in some cases, right? I'm not gonna say necessarily in every single case, but I also know I fall into certain patterns
I
with things.
I can recognize after I break with someone which parent it was that they
Right.
reminded me of. So in my case, I think yes, but I don't think in everyone's case.
Yeah.
But I can say in my own personal experience, sometimes like, whoa, right? And it's like I can't believe like now that I see the similarities and why I was attracted to that person. So I think that's one part of why people shouldn't attract back their ex because maybe they weren't right for them in the first place. What's another good reason? What it does to your body. So imagine, and you've been in these relationships from the other side. So you have
Yeah.
the anxious and avoidant it's so push pull and what it really does and this happens with narcissists and just people that they attract to and we'll have a full episode on narcissists
We're gonna end up having, I think, multiple
multiple
episodes on,
episodes
on
on narcissists
narcissism. Yeah.
we have a little experience but within that push pull right there's a chemical reaction going on in your body
Absolutely.
right so there's
Absolutely.
dopamine and then
You
cortisol
get that
and
high,
it's
and then yep, you get the hit, and then you get the withdrawal,
and
and it's
over
back and
time,
forth.
that can make you more anxious. It can make you
Absolutely.
feel sick and get kind of some interesting, ailments that you've never had before.
Oh, right. You take a look
Yeah.
at the mind body
Yeah.
connection and what stress and anxiety and all those things do.
And it's constant too. And
Absolutely.
especially for the anxious attached, it's so constant. They are ruminating 24/7. That's all they are thinking about.
Yeah.
And they can't stop themselves, right? They definitely need help to break that. But these sites aren't helping them do
No.
that. These sites are helping them more focus on it. Again, they're giving them a quick fix by regulating their nervous system for a bit. It's the same as going back to an ex-girlfriend. You're breaking up with your girlfriend and you go spend time with your ex-girlfriend. You're not getting regulated by your current relationship. So what's the thing that's going to make you feel most comfortable in that moment?
You go back to what you're used to. You go back to what you're comfortable with.
Who, if you
What you
stayed
know.
there long enough, now you have two problems, not one.
Exactly.
So I don't know if that works. But again, let's go through this list here,
Yep.
right?
What else is on this list?
It says stats for getting them back and keeping them in the long run are dismal.
Okay.
What did we say? It was something like 33%.
I think 33. I think 1 in 3
Yeah.
At least what you
And
found,
then 18% might have a real fighting chance of getting back together.
or lasting.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, that 18% is not very different than the stats in terms of really successful, healthy relationships as it is. So
Okay.
Esther Perel, okay, another,
My mother's favorite.
okay, yeah, a great, great relationship expert, and she presumes that 1 in 5 relationships are actually healthy. So she presumes that 80% of relationships out there today are not healthy because at least one of the partners has not done the work. And again, people stay together for various reasons, so on and so forth. So,
Makes
so if
sense.
you look at that 20% are truly healthy, and you
Yeah.
look at here, the 18% where people get back and it actually works, again, doesn't mean those relationships are necessarily even healthy, but again, you start looking at these numbers and it's really kind of an eye opener. It really gives pause for thought. That doesn't mean people should not be investing in relationships. That does not mean that people should not be getting into them, but rather,
That makes me feel better that I do well in chaos, though. If most of
right?
my relationships are going to go that way, and then, I'm going to have to start from scratch every time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
But it's what all this goes back to in terms of that 33% that get back and the 18%. I think a lot of it goes back to, if you take a look at the quick fix, you're so hyper focused on the other person that you're not working on yourself.
yeah.
Now, the reality is, typically when relationships end,
Yeah.
both people are at fault.
Yeah,
I
you're
think,
not focused
right?
on what the issues were in the relationship. You're just
Exactly.
focused on what can I do just to get them back for that quick fix. Once I have them back, maybe we can go to therapy or something, but you're not focused on yourself. And the only thing you have control over is
Yourself.
yourself. Yeah.
And I think the key there is, and this is where the sites don't really talk about this. If you truly do the work on you, not for your ex,
Yeah.
not for someone else, but you do it for yourself because you want to grow, you might realize down the road that it wasn't the right person, or you might realize that it potentially could have been the right person if you've done the work and they've chosen to do the work on their own and independently.
Yeah. Or maybe it's just time to thank that person for finally teaching you the lesson.
Absolutely.
Not going back and going through the whole rigmarole with them again, but thanking them for this lesson
Yeah.
so that you can take it forward. And, look, one of those things is, one of the lessons that people really need to learn is everyone has their own pattern. Right.
Absolutely.
And until you recognize what that pattern is, you can't fix it. So a therapist can go through it with you, but most people, I think, come to this realization on their own of what their pattern has been. If they go back through 20 years of relationships, if they haven't been successful, okay, what was my pattern? And the people might not be the same. You might not even be attracted to the same type of person physically.
But
But
it's a pattern of behavior.
it's a pattern of your behavior,
Yeah.
right? And you can
Yeah.
actually see how each one of your relationships went. And if you see that that same pattern repeated itself over and over again, it's your pattern. Where did that pattern come from? So now you got to go back even further. It's great to focus on the person that they're anxious or avoidant, but that's not really going to help you in the long run. You really have to go back to your own childhood and reprogram yourself to fix what those issues are. So now, it's better not to be focused on them. So if you're not focused on them, then you can focus on yourself. And if you can focus on yourself, sorry about that. If you can focus on yourself, then you're going to get so much further ahead. And then you might actually have a real chance down the line, if this is the right person for
Absolutely.
you, that they could be, as I think you said at some point in our notes, that you were leaving it up to the universe to help people find, to help people solve this, as opposed to putting so much effort into something and basically repelling it instead of attracting it.
I would say when you start looking at the universe,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, right? Some people, it's just there's signs everywhere where you're looking for any sign as
Yeah.
a sign of hope. I do believe in some ways that, yeah, maybe there are sometimes things that we are just so closed off to it, you don't see that.
Yeah.
That being said, it's got to be more than just the universe bringing two people back
It's just the
together.
universe are giving up control and not having expectations, which the
Absolutely.
two things together are very detrimental to any relationship, because you can only control yourself. As we said, you can't control the other person. If you have expectations,
Yeah.
expectations are a sense of control.
Best example, right? When you're talking about control, you have a handful of, let's say, sand,
Yeah.
right? The
It's
tighter you
slipping through your
squeeze, and
fingers.
the more is just running
Yeah.
down, right? But
Yeah.
you
If
have
you
a
just hold
hand,
it like
you
this, you
hold it
can like,
nice
yeah.
and light,
Yeah.
right? And you're gonna hold on to most that sand.
Yeah.
The difference here,
Yeah. The more tightly
you're
you hold
relate,
on to
right?
anything, the more it slips through your
Right? The
fingers.
more you
Yeah.
want control,
Yeah.
the more you're going to lose things. The more you're willing to kind of, again, sit with that discomfort,
Yeah.
relinquish it a bit.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what can happen because you're not trying to control everything. You're living with some of that discomfort. You're letting things, whether you want to call it the universe, whether you just want to call it your own journey, but
Yeah.
you're letting things happen more
I,
organically.
I think that's a great word there is discomfort, right? But I mean, while we're saying that, I mean, I do want to say the last point here was there's no growth in going backwards, which we can touch on in a second, but I might be able to tie that in here. There's, no growth in discomfort because there's no growth in going backwards, but the discomfort is one of those things too. You want that person to come back because, as I said before, you're going to help you regulate your nervous system, which you cannot do yourself at that
Right.
point if you're the anxious attached.
Yep.
So it makes sense that that's all you want because you think that's going to solve your problem. Then the funny thing is you get it and then you don't want it, and then it pulls away from you again, then you want it, and then you get it. It's like a drug. Uh, but it's so interesting when we talk about discomfort because as for anxious people specifically, and it's one of the points I have here, and I think it was coined by his name is Ross Rosenberg.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of his book, so Ross, I'm sorry I can't remember the name of your book, but I will mention you again throughout the podcast because I've watched many of your podcasts and videos. He talks about pathological loneliness. So if you think about that for the anxiously attached, and people will say this about them is like, you can't be alone. And it's true.
Oh, how many people do you know that are like that?
Well, that's the
We've
thing.
seen a ton of
And
it.
then they move on from
One
one
person
person to
to
the next. The
another.
only other time you see that is with narcissists. They do that, but for a different reason,
Absolutely. Totally,
right?
totally different.
That's more for show. Whereas with, anxiously attached people, they're doing it because they really can't be alone. Because again, they need someone to come in to almost, complete something in their life that they don't feel that they have. It's like, and throughout their whole lives, they never focus on themselves.
No.
They're always focused on validation outside of themselves. And that's the hardest thing for them to learn. And once they learn it, it makes it a little more because then you have to learn self-love. You have to learn how to sit. The hardest thing is anytime a therapist will say to you, sit in your loneliness. How do you sit in your loneliness? Right? It's one of those things is like someone can say it to you, but until you actually have to do it, even try looking up videos, like sit in your loneliness. There's no videos on it
No,
really.
no.
Right?
But I mean, there's so many people
Mhm.
that I know, right? And I'm sure, you know a lot of people as well. And it's
Yeah.
not a criticism. It's the reality in terms of their attachment style and going way back as reasons why.
Yeah.
But it's literally as soon as something ends, you're looking for the next person. You're looking for the next person. I You can say I could have been guilty of that,
Yeah.
but for totally different reasons. Where it's just because of my avoidance, where it'd be okay, this ends, okay, next. Just
It's
it's a different type of hit.
But to be fair, I mean, a lot of people are out there on the apps, either looking for some kind of validation from someone in
Absolutely.
some way. I just find it's more extreme with anxious, preoccupied people because they really can't sit in it.
And here's the difference. I think again, when you might be an avoidant, it's okay. It's the next relationship or
Mhm.
next date. A lot of times, you're not enjoying those dates. You're going
You're
out,
doing it to,
right?
yeah,
Kind of fill time or what the hell or whatever the thing
or
is.
have people message you every day and it fills your time
Feels
and things like that.
exactly. But with the anxious
Mhm.
type, then it's almost this one's really it's going to be that replacement, and you see a lot where this one's the one for me. That ends. The next one comes along. No, this one's the one for
Yeah.
me. That and it's each and when you take a look,
Yeah.
right? When you do enough dating, it's a matter of how can every person you meet
Hmm.
be the one,
Yeah. It's true.
right?
Well, what's funny, I mean, I'm about to go into what issues the anxious attachers really need to overcome, but I'm saying if you start doing the work and just give an example of this, is a big part of doing that work, and it's like, what's on the list here? Less people pleasing,
Yep.
working on your codependency, toxic shame, abandonment issues, fear of rejection. Did I say people pleasing already? They have poor boundaries. They cannot read red flags for shit. CPTSD, which we talked about again, which was
Oh my gosh. Was it the no? There was the complex post-traumatic
Complex
stress
post-traumatic
disorder.
stress
Yes,
disorder.
yes,
Yeah.
the complex
Okay.
part. Yep,
Pathological loneliness was on the
yep.
list. I might have said love addiction already. Susceptibility to be in relationships with avoidant attachers and narcissists, as we
Yep.
said. Usually it starts with, there's a pattern. You usually start with the avoidant, and then the narcissist follows, and then another narcissist follows. That's a pattern that they go through. Anyone who's ever seen the movie Jerry Maguire gets a good example of this when they do his birthday video. And every girl is like, he can't be alone. 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 And it's like, you should watch that if you're an anxious attacher because it'll seep into you. But here's the thing when you start doing the work, okay? One of the things you notice, and just, I'm going to speak about because I'm talking about the
Right.
anxious part, right? Which I
Yeah.
think you've had it in your life, but I think I've kind of lived a little bit more than you.
It's interesting when I'm in a relationship or when I'm seeing someone where I do feel there's a connection.
Mhm.
I kind of sway more from avoidant to a bit more the
Yeah.
anxious avoidance style
Yeah. So
where,
you understand
right?
it to a
I
certain
definitely
degree. Yeah.
where again I have to be engaged and interested in that person, but then the anxious side comes out where I'm not hearing from them quickly enough.
Hmm.
What are they
Yeah.
thinking? It's all those thoughts, and it's not a great
So
feeling.
here's the great thing about that. So once someone starts to do the work, and like as an example, again, you do the thing 21 days, 30 days, 90 days, which I ended up doing it for 90 days.
Right.
But that helped me. And then again, being in groups with other people helped me because I could see their perspective, how they got through it. Talk therapy helps you too.
Yep.
Once you start to come through the other side of it, and I'm not saying it's not a lifetime thing where you have to keep, where you don't have to keep working on it over and over again,
Absolutely.
right?
It's not either a quick fix or something that once you find the secret,
Yeah.
this is the new you,
Yeah.
because we're hardwired a certain way and we tend to revert back to that hardwiring.
But what I was going to say though is that when you're not chasing people anymore because you're anxious, you anxiously need to chase them to complete you, Jerry Maguire again. Once you stop doing that and you become more self-aware of what you do, a little bit more self-love, your self-esteem goes back up, right? You reprogram yourself from childhood a little bit.
Yeah.
And again, it's just a long journey, but I'm just saying, once you start to do it a little bit and you start to change your patterns a bit, and even in dating, when you start talking to people, okay, it doesn't bother you when people don't reach out to you anymore. And what typically happens is if you don't contact them, you feel like, oh, they're never going to contact me again. But what usually happens?
Oh, they end up reaching out.
You become the magnet,
Yep.
right? Instead of repelling someone, you're that part of the magnet where now people are attracted to you because you're giving them enough room to make the decision for themselves and with the real you, the authentic you that wasn't programmed to be a certain way, that didn't suffer all the abandonment and all these things, isn't people pleasing because, they're so fearful that someone's going to leave them. Once you're comfortable, it's amazing how the whole thing flips the script.
And part of that's people pick up on that energy as well,
Yeah.
right? Like when you think about it,
It's a calm energy.
if you're coming off as being avoidant and dismissive, right, that's going to turn people off.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to turn people off.
Avoidance a tough one too once they pick up on it for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? Where it's, um, and I'm guilty, or I was definitely guilty of that. Where it'd be like, no, I don't believe in this. I don't believe in marriage. I don't believe in
Yeah.
this. I don't believe in that. So on and so
Avoidants aren't
forth.
necessarily authentic either because they'll
No,
do things
no.
like they'll text you all day and then like 6 months later they'll say to you like, I don't really like texting. I actually hate it. It sucks a lot of my energy. Can we not do that anymore? It's like, but you're not the person you told me you were,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that becomes a big issue for the other person too. So it's like there are issues on both sides,
Absolutely, but
right?
you know what? The best advice I give is you be yourself from the get-go. I would rather someone see me, my good and bad, right from the get-go, and be
Yeah.
like, "Okay, this guy's interesting," or "This guy's a total dick,"
Yeah.
right? And that's whatever it happens to be, that's okay. But at least it's better for them to get an authentic idea of who I am early on than playing games because that mask has got to come off eventually.
Yeah.
The true side has to come out. And one of the biggest ways to have a relationship fall apart is for the true side to come out where it's like, holy shit, who is this person?
Well, it's
Right?
funny. It's funny because when you look at anxious people when they're talking about themselves, right? And then you go to any of these groups and you just see it from both sides, right? Because you're listening to the two different the avoidant type groups talking about the anxious type groups. There's never any secure people in these groups because they're off doing something else. But when they're arguing
Or
out,
just because there's not a lot of them out there, because I'm still sticking with that. But anyhow,
Yeah, but I mean, when they're arguing it out amongst themselves, like they're, you can really see that, they make very valid points about the anxious people, and the anxious people are always complaining about the avoidance this, the avoidance that. But the truth is, look, you have someone who's people pleasing,
Yeah.
right? That's false. You're people pleasing because you don't want someone to leave you, right? You learn that as a kid. You think if you can appease the parent, that they're going to show you more love and all this, and that grows into your adulthood. But what happens with people pleasing and codependency, where now you want to bring them too close, and that's not fair either, because everyone should be able to be interdependent, not dependent on each other.
Yeah.
But what are some of the issues of that? And one of it is they get really resentful, and they present like this really nice exterior when they get into the relationship, but over time they overgive so much that they become so resentful of the other person, because it's not in the other person. It's not fair to expect that of the other person, right? And so it's like they don't see that they're creating part of the problem. I was so good. I'm like, you weren't. You were creating part of that problem. You are part of the dynamic. And that's the other thing that we go back to the beginning of this. Sorry for hitting the microphone. When we go back to the beginning of this, it's like, yeah, if all you're trying to do is get your ex back, you're not fixing any of that. You're fixated on another person and trying to get them back into their lives without actually fixing anything, especially not yourself. And once again, the only person you can control is
Yourself.
yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think it's really hard for people to break these patterns that they have in their relationships and based on their attachment issues, right?
We're getting the cue. We're getting the cue.
We're getting the
Yeah, we're
cue.
getting the
All
cue. Got to
right.
wrap up
So,
soon.
all right. But yeah, so
Um,
this is kind of our last point, right? It's like, why do you think it's so hard for people to break these patterns? And then do you think it's really possible, again, for people to really reconcile?
So again, I think there's a few facets, right? Part of it is that number one, we are hardwired a certain way,
Yeah.
and that makes it really, really tricky, right? It's about, as we've talked about in the past, reparenting,
Yeah.
kind of rewiring the way we think, the way we do things. So
no
there's
one's going to
that.
do that for you.
No.
No.
Number two, we revert to what is comfortable for us.
Yeah. Fear of the
Okay.
unknown. Yeah.
And so we fall back into our patterns.
Comfort is death. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So those are a couple of really, really big ones when you take a look at that.
Core patterns, habits, core beliefs that you've had since you were a child that aren't
Absolutely.
necessarily your own. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Anything else?
Wow. Put me on the spot here. Let me think about this one for a
I'll
second.
give you one. I think a lot of people have a problem of being alone with their own thoughts, especially during a breakup, because it's hard on people. And as you're going through those stages of grief or whatever, it's hard, right? And you don't want to keep relying on the same people. So it's like the person who's really going to make you feel better in that moment is the person who made you feel worse.
And again, there's also fear. Not only fear of being alone in the moment, but fear of being alone in the long term, right? What if I can't find someone who makes me feel the way said person did? What if I can't find someone who I connect
best
with?
I can get.
Absolutely. What if I don't even have any future opportunities?
With how many people on the planet?
About 8 billion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
you might have a couple opportunities, but I get it. Like people get so into their head and they just can't, it's tunnel vision. It's like this person or nothing.
And that's where it's part of it is don't believe in the fact there's only one person that's soulmate. Or conversely, if you want to believe in soulmates, then there's multiple soulmates who come in
for different reasons
at different times to teach different lessons.
Yeah.
And the reality is, unless it was a total clusterfuck of a relationship, okay? Like I'm talking about incredibly abusive and everything else.
Someone punched a hole in your wall? Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Be thankful for the lessons learned, because you can take away something from each and every one.
Yeah.
And it benefits you and helps you grow.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. Again, can two people reconcile successfully? We touched on this at the beginning.
Yeah.
What do we really think? Can you do that through one of these sites? Are they going to help you speed through that? Or are there issues when people are teaching you how to, do these 20 things? And if you master these things, and there's like 20 different guys telling you 20 different things, and there's one for girls and there's one for guys. If you're following this list, you can, I think, get the person back.
It's not going to last.
Are you going to keep them?
No. But, and my take on this, I do believe that two people can get back together and it can be lasting. But here's the key for me. Number one, there had to be a decent foundation to begin with. And what I mean by that is, look, mistakes were made.
Yeah.
But you're looking at intent versus impact.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the intent behind everything?
Yeah.
Okay. Secondly, are you going off to work on yourself for you versus the other
Yeah.
person? Thirdly, have you given it ample time? You don't have a clock set or a stopwatch, but you're giving it time,
Yeah.
no finish line in end.
Yeah.
Okay. And are both people truly doing the work for themselves when they come back? Hey, if those foundations are still there, if those things that still drew them to each other
Yeah.
and they've done the work and they've grown, then there's a fighting chance.
Basically, you're saying if you had my old pattern, which was burning it to the ground, just give up. Well, that was a fun topic to talk about today. We are sorry we didn't want to go after these sites per se, because as I said,
Yeah,
there are some good, valuable things that people do get out of it. It does help them. But there's always pros and cons to anything. And I just thought it was a
absolutely.
valuable topic to talk about. Thank you all for joining us today. We had a fun time having this conversation from a male point of view.
From a male point of view, and,
Yeah.
and I would love to hear people's feedback. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out, let us know because we'd love to hear your take on this and your experiences.
Yeah. So I'm Adam.
I'm Al.
And this was the Kings of Chaos this is a podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Take care.